Thank you very much for these kind words and these exciting introduction. So I'm happy to be here, and the questions that you raise now, Sven, for the kind of things we're doing, I think this lecture is a way of stepping back a bit and reflect on what kind of theories do we have and how do we use them and what does it mean to use those kinds of theories, and then maybe your questions come back in another light. So I will start with some very broad things and then come to the core of the matter. So as a start, so this probably is familiar to you, but it also is used to get some distance from the issue of innovation theories. First, the idea of innovation, which is, well, centers around making something new, and the idea of new combinations, like Schumpeter stressed. It also refers to knowledge, and also this idea that there should be some commercial or societal success. So there's a difference with invention, which is just a good idea, and innovation is the attempt to make this somehow successful. This idea of success is also used in the UK definitions and DTI, and this is a broader definition. And let's have a closer look at that. So it says it includes technical, design, manufacturing, management, and commercial activities for a product or a process or equipment. So there is already some ambiguity here that innovation is both pointing to the activities and the outcome of these activities in terms of a product or a process. So innovation is ambiguous. You never know what exactly you're talking about when you say innovation. Is it the activities or something that comes out of that? So the eventual product or process. There's the same ambiguity with technology. And well, that used to be solved by having this distinction between technique and technology. Technique is the actual application of skills, whereas technology is the know-how. So like we have psychology, which is the knowledge of the psyche, which is not the same as the psyche. It's knowledge about it. But, well, it becomes mingled, and this is very nicely phrased in the historian definition of the historian Charles Singer, who says, well, technology is how things are made, so that's the knowledge, and what things are made, which is the outcome. And again, if you then read in the newspapers that the government will invest some additional money for biotechnology, you're not sure what they are investing in. Is this investing in knowledge or in test tubes? Or so there's always this ambiguity, and also make sure that you keep that in mind, that there are different meanings there. Apart from that, there is also this layered existence. Technology is the artifact, the singular item, but also the system, how these artifacts are connected into something that works, sometimes including even the organization. So think about the technology of the underground. So yes, that includes the rails and the train, but it also includes maybe the stairs down to the underground, but also maybe the organization, the schemes. So it's not so clear where technology begins and ends in those kinds of examples. And then, yes, it's also knowledge, reservoir of knowledge, and technology also exists as a symbol. So it's like a car is not just an artifact and a system, it's also a symbol. And a computer is a symbol, and a chemical plant is a symbol. And in that sense, it also exists in social reality as a symbol. Okay, some preliminary thoughts about all this. I think this is, when we think about innovation and theories of innovation, we should always keep this in mind. This is a picture from The Economist, really love that journal, which shows as it says, the genesis of an innovation, so how innovations come about. And, well, what is clearly visible are the ups and downs, where it starts with some ideas, some problems. Maybe you can read some of those texts that they have some trials, it works, but then they discover that the boss hates the project, so it is despair again, and it goes up from, you don't see that here now, oh, not everything is visible on my, well, almost everything. It goes up between ecstasy and despair. In this case, it ends with ecstasy, that they really are happy with the project, but it also might go downwards. So if you look at actual innovation activities, then there's not so much to say about all this. There's all kinds of going up and down and various forces and alliances. It's not so easy to say something in general about all this. Yet, we do that. There are theories of innovation, and we use them. And I invite you to see those theories as attempts to tame this messiness. And what I would like to do in this lecture is to present the various ways in which we think about technology and innovation, and see what that brings if you start from, say, economic starting points or social, historical, or management starting points. So that is what I will do. I will present 8 theories from these 3 starting points. Then I will discuss some of the basic tensions you have with any theory, and finally I will reflect on them as, well, ways of telling stories, which for some of you might come as a surprise, that when we think about innovation as a story-telling activity, but well, let's see how that works out. So, these 8 theories of innovation. If you start with economic theories of innovation, then there are some deviations from the traditional orthodox views, which is mainly based on what Schumpeter in the 1930s and 40s wrote about innovation and technology. And some further steps in innovation systems and later on path dependency. I will introduce them. Then I will introduce 3 theories that starts from reflection on social historical observations, the social construction of technology, the large technical systems, and the multi-level perspective, which is very popular now in some corners, MLP, although some people still think MLP means My Little Pony, which is, if you Google MLP, you would still find that, so see how that works. And management theory. So if you start in businesses, this is where you will end up in the first place, but management theories of innovation can also be applied in a broader sense to policy and so the country as a firm, so to speak. Okay. So economic theories of innovation, what they do in general, so these 3 that I introduced, but there are many more, so it's a bit arbitrary where I start and begin counting the theories, but this is a general starting point for many theories. You will recognize that you see that technical change is helping the competitive position of companies and nations, and you see, yeah, you really try to understand how that is part of the dynamics of competition. And yeah, then you also see that technological change is part of these economic systems, and you also see gradually more and more emphasis on not just the individual players, but the whole environment in which they have to play out, so the institutions of nations, industries, and technologies. And what these new economic theories of innovation mainly stress is that history matters, which is a lesson mainly for themselves, that in the beginning economic theories are not taking history into account, and gradually you see, and we will see that in a moment, that history matters in these new theories of innovation. When you start from sociology and history, then innovation, yes, it's something that happens as a phenomenon in the world that could be studied as something that concerns people and firms and governments. And well, this then raises all kinds of questions. Mainly this has been discussed in terms of determinism. So is it the case that technology determines history? That because of the technological possibilities, social dynamics unfold in a particular way. So technology determines social change. Is that it? Or is it the other way around? That people decide how they want to live, and then technology follows. Well, in these broad caricatures, you will understand it will not play out in this way. It will be a mix, but still, these two poles are there. Is it technology that drives history, or is it people that drive history, and including the fate of technologies? Anyhow, there is, in these kind of theories, a focus on other things than competition and institutions. It's about interactions, about agency, social groups. And what you would see here is the growing interest and the growing acknowledgement that everything is so much weaved together in such a way that you don't even see the seams of this, the so-called seamless web, famous phrase by Thomas Hughes, the historian, where you would see that activities that help innovation are both technical but also social and also economic. And the other term that comes up is the idea of co-evolution. So you cannot see technology and innovation as just in one corner and society in the other corner. It builds up at the same time, in the same way. When you build technologies, you build society. So that's another starting point. Maybe not competing, but it's at least they are there in parallel. Then another starting point, the third one, management theories of innovation. So then the question is not so much how to understand all this, the question is what to do. The strategic question of using innovation and how to account for the best choices, how to profit from innovation, how to make sure that markets and customers are on your side. And well, what you would see here is especially that innovation brings a lot of unexpected new turns, and you should prepare for that. So these are three broad starting points you find if you would look for innovations, theories of innovations. And these three starting points, they had their own lessons and their own experience and their own way of developing. Okay, it will be a bit more concrete if I then delve now into the economic theories. They start, this is their basic starting point, that you would have orthodox economics. So this is, these are theories that are still mainstream. This 95% of economics is this, starting from perfect rationality, optimizing behavior. That is, yeah, that's mainstream economics. And it starts with the idea of equilibrium, where you would have forces of demand and supply, and there is external changes that might change those equilibria, and technology is one of those external changes. And well, the way technology appears in these theories is external, and you have the production function. I will draw that. capital and labor, the two main ingredients of, to explain what's going on in economic activities. And then you can have, this is the production function, so you could have high capital investments that will give you low input of labor, or low capital and you need a lot of labor. So if you have one big machine with few laborers, or many workers with small tools. And then what technology is doing, it shifts the production function. And depending on the cost of labor and capital, you could then see different optimal points. So this is in a very crude way, the standard way of how economics is dealing, orthodox economics is dealing with technology. Technology is not thematized, it's just coming from the outside. So pushing this production function to zero is technical change. It is not understood what technical change is. Apparently it's there. And so this is the residual factor. Nobel Prize winner Solov, he got his Nobel Prize for pointing to that some strange factor was in making an impact in our formulae for economic behavior, and the strange factor, the residual factor that is unexplained, is called technology. So that is still mainstream economics, and there have been some deviations taking innovation and technology on board in their explanations of what's going on. So economic explanations of innovation. And so they focus on something that is not explained in the orthodox economics, where you would have, and this is in search for a useful theory of innovation, that is the famous phrase of Nelson and Winter, already 1977, where they would introduce this idea of evolution, so variation and selection, and focusing on technology in firms, in different sectors, and how there would be variation guided by rules, heuristics, search heuristics, and how these steps then end up in trajectories and eventually technological paradigms. So the way we work with technologies, and these could be different in different kinds. So in this stresses that history matters. It could have been different, and it matters what happens in the past. So this is a deviation from standard economics. In standard economics, the past does not matter. Here, it matters. So these are, maybe you're familiar with some of these terms, and then I hope it brings them into perspectives. So this is a second theory of national innovation systems that started with these neo-Schumpeterian. And this is a question about, well, that is not dealt with in orthodox economics at all, how to explain that economies are so different. Here we have the work of Chris Freeman in the 1980s, especially interested when economies in the West were having crisis, whereas Japan was doing quite well. So, and he went to Japan and studied innovation there, and he came up with all kinds of differences in terms of institutions, of capital, of education, and so he was trying to understand this forging ahead, catching up and falling behind, which is focusing on the environment of innovation. It does not just take place as a result of two indicators or two variables, capital and labor. It's something that is taking place in a historic setting. And if you start to thematize that, then you see, well, there are all kinds of subsystems, science, technology, economy, politics, culture. You can include them in your theory, so it becomes more a social theory than just economic, but it still starts from economic perspectives. And the idea is to explain the differences between sectors and nations and regions. Okay. The third theory is starting with the, for economists, very strange situation that an inferior product will still survive and dominate the market, which is a puzzle for economists. It's not a puzzle for historians or sociologists. They know, and everyone else, I would say. For every normal citizen, it is something, a fact of life, that sometimes the best survives, not the best survives, but for economists it's something that is strange and needs explanation, because if you start from equilibria, then always the best solution should survive. Why is not the best solution surviving? And this is the famous QWERTY story, where you would have the QWERTY keyboard, which is not the superior solution. There are alternatives, they are better, they are proven that they are better, but still they are not here. And the story is, and there has been all kinds of questions whether this is a real good historical case or not, but still it's an icon of the idea of path dependency. Once it has been introduced, and the keyboard has been introduced in the typewriters, and the typewriters with these hammers, and the hammers were at risk of becoming entangled, and so you had to define the keyboard in such a way that the hammers that were mostly used were far apart. So it's the most clumsy keyboard you can expect, because the hammers that you use are far apart, so the keys that you use are very far apart, and the meters that your fingers have to make are much more than if you would have the keys that you use the most close to each other. And there are alternatives, like the Dvorak keyboard developed in 1930s, still not used. And well, there are some programs on the internet, maybe you're interested in finding out, and when you submit a text, upload a text, it calculates how many kilometers your fingers had made in typing this text. And you could also compare with another keyboard so with a long text, maybe 3 kilometers, and with another keyboard it would have been 1.5. So if you're interested in more efficiency in your production here, maybe switch to a keyboard. But the point here is that it will not happen, because you're used to it, invested, and sunk investments and economies of scale. Others point to this idea of increasing returns. So that's the idea that that's the network effect. And so the traditional idea is, the traditional example is the fax machine. If you're the only one with the fax, it has no value, because you cannot fax to anyone else. And if everyone else has a fax, then it's very useful. Then the net effect, so it increases. The return increases, where normally in economics it would be decreasing return. So this is explaining from the past. Some have also reversed that and say, well, you can also build those paths and build sink investments and increasing returns, and then that's the idea of path creation. Okay, so you see here economics starting from equilibria, but then also increasingly accounting for that history matters, and that choices matter, and that the environment matters. So it becomes more and more social theories. If we then go to the second starting point, sociology, history, then you see other puzzles. Not so much about competitivity or equilibrium. It's a puzzle of how to account for what is happening, and how to account for that something is successful, and that it's better. Maybe you know this famous case of the bicycles, Wiebe Bijker. It is also an icon of studies of innovation, where one particular bicycle, which with wheels equally sized and with the pedals in the middle, and with air tires, rubber tires, that is now the standard bicycle, but it has not been in that way. And traditionally you would say, well, why do we have such a bicycle and not another one? Well, that is because it's successful. But yeah, how could you explain that? And you could say, well, it is better, but better is so different for different groups. So in this case study of the bicycle, you see that there are indeed, when the bicycle was introduced, or I should say when all kinds of varieties of the bicycle were introduced in the end of the 19th century, different groups had different ideas of what it was and what to do with it. And some would say this is something for transportation, so it should be safe, and others say no, it's a machine to impress others, like a skateboard. So it's good that it goes fast and that it's dangerous. And you saw a development in which the bicycle became more dangerous and more dangerous. With the famous high wheeler, it became higher and higher. So you see that what it is, what a bicycle is, and whether it's a good bicycle or something that is failing, depends on your set of criteria. There's not just one single set of criteria. It is closely linked to how groups see this. So that is the interpretive flexibility. There's not just one interpretation of what a good bicycle is, there are many. And you could study that. Large technical systems, mainly connected to the works of Thomas Hughes and his study of Edison and the way Edison was successful in building a new electricity system. And he especially stressed these ideas, the key concepts, the seamless web. So what Edison was doing was both technical and political and economic. And for instance, when he was thinking about the light bulb, the famous light bulb, he is seen as the inventor of the light bulb. It was not that he was just sitting somewhere and thought, well, this is a light bulb, what should I do with this? No, he had an idea of competing with the existing gas system, where people had to pay for gas and then could use that for their lighting. And he thought, I have an alternative, I will attack this, and I need a light bulb that will help me to compete with gas. And then he was starting to calculate, and he was calculating an imaginative electricity network, including light bulbs. And this imaginative network consisted of copper wires, consisted of generators, consisted of those light bulbs, which did not still exist. And then he was calculating the costs of this, and he discovered that copper was really decisive. He should reduce the cost of copper. And how could he do that? Well, he could do that, and he was juggling with the laws of electricity of Ohm and Joule. And he could do that by having very high resistance light bulbs, because then the amount of energy produced in these light bulbs would be high, and whereas the loss in the electricity system would be low. Otherwise, he would have used very thick copper cables, but now he could use them very thin. So the point is that he started from reasoning from the whole large technical system, and then sort of in a reverse way decided what he should do. The system builder. And Thomas Hughes also describes how this system then gets momentum and starts to include much more. The systems are eating up their environment. And when they come to a barrier, which is called the reverse salient, then they have to devote their attention to that. So one of the reverse salients of Thomas Hughes was the idea that during the day, people did not use a lot of electricity, so he had to think about ways to make people use electricity during the day, and he was buying fairgrounds where people could go to and they used a lot of electricity. So you still have these theories very important in all kinds of thinking about systems, like cars, electricity, and it's a very strong theory. And starting from history, so interesting combination here. There are some theories that try to bind that together in transition, so the MLP, and maybe I should go to this. If you go to a conference on transitions, this is the sort of entry ticket you need to show, yes, we know that we have read the literature and that we have this thinking in terms of the niches, the regimes, and the landscape developments. I guess these pictures are familiar. Sorry. What it tries to do is to bring these things together and think about transitions, how to predict and to influence them, and it tries to have these various layers of development at the same time. Okay. So these were the sociological and historical cases. Now I have two more that start from management. One is on the idea of the dominant design, technology cycles. How can businesses profit from innovation? And it shows that, so there will be cycles in which there will be waves of innovation, and you should try to survive those waves. So these are the theories of Thies and Utterback, Abernethy. And so it focuses on dominant designs, something that is now seen as the way to produce, and think about the dominant design of photography. For a long time it was with these camera rolls, and now it's digital. Kodak had a really difficult time to switch to the new cycle, and so it really tries to show how you survive in different waves of innovation. And the last one, maybe this is also the first theory of innovation, diffusion. And on purpose I present this as the last one because it's seen often as the theory, but there are many more. And it has its starting point in mass media, studying how news ideas travel, but you could also study how new technologies travel. And say, having a flat television screen, you would have curves like this, or the internet, or, well, these curves still are there and still are useful. They focus then on different types of adopters, so the early adopters and the latecomers. And there will be some focus on how users will also change the innovation. So there's quite some emphasis these days on user innovation and the creative role of users, not just passive in terms of adopting, buying, but also changing that. Okay, so these are quite some theories, neo-Schumpeterian, so you have them on top. I won't repeat it now, but you will see the three blocks of economic, socio-historical, and management. And what I think is interesting to reflect on what these theories are doing, what kind of exercises they are, and I will do that in two ways. First, by pointing to some generic tensions you always have with theories, and secondly, what kind of storytelling is it? So first, this tension. Okay, the first one is the question of level, because society, social phenomena, even businesses, they are layered. So what do you focus on? Is it on the individual or the individual artifact, individual part? Is it the team, the firm? Is it the sector, society as a whole? So you will have different possibilities. So what is the level of aggregation? The same holds for technology. So you could focus on complete infrastructures, but also on particular devices. And then, yeah, so the question is, what is foreground, what is background? Would you focus on these broader systems, or would you focus on individual devices and individual agency? And you could do a mapping, and there's not so much time to do that now, but I can show you some of the outcomes here. So if you would just have these 8 theories and these 4 layers, you could say, well, this is what they focus on. And we could discuss this in more detail if you like, but the point is you can do such exercise and you could keep in mind, so where do they focus on? And if I would just highlight one, for instance, social construction of technology, you would see that they focus on the individual artifacts, so the bicycle, but also society at large. What groupings in society are there? They don't focus so much on different sectors or on different firms. And so, yes, it matters, and theories are different. And also when you are interested in particular studies on particular phenomena to delve into, you should think about, is this the right theory? Then, then the second tension, already in the definition of innovation, is it about the process or is it about the outcome? And there can be different ambitions. So is it to understand? Is it to intervene? So you can have all kinds of ways of dealing with innovation, trying to understand innovation, so either process or outcome. And again, you would have a mapping like this, that many economic theories, they would focus on the process, so the ways in which competition takes place, whereas, well, for instance, SCOT focuses on the outcome. It really wants to understand why the technology, why the bicycle looks like this and not otherwise. Whereas for economics, that is not interesting. They don't explain why we have flat televisions and not otherwise. It's just when there is a flat television, what kind of strategic games do you get? Okay, a third tension is, again, already in the definitions, is technology about knowledge or is it about the material? And I repeat here the definition of Charles Singer: what things are made, how things are made, and if you really are carefully observing what they are talking about, is it about knowledge or is it about the material, then you also see very different ratings here. So again, this is also a reflection when you would like to use theories on what they are dealing with, and it also sharpens your critical look at your own exercises when you keep these distinctions in mind. A fourth tension with theories, any theories, is descriptive, prescriptive. Do you just observe, a distantiated observation? You are not involved. You don't care at all. You just observe what is happening. Or are you part of the game and would like to give advice? And philosophically, this is also known as the ought-is distinction. Are you talking about how things ought to be or how they are? And when you mix them, when you conflate them, this is the naturalistic fallacy. So what you would say, from reasoning how things are, you conclude how they should be. So if women spend more time in households, then you say, well, this is how it should be, this because women are more predisposed to work in households. That's the naturalistic fallacy. I hope it's a provocative statement. I see some people nodding, but that's not. Yes, I thought so. And so a prescriptive theory has some model of the right situation or behavior or outcome. And so that is also different. So for instance, innovation systems, they are prescriptive. They have some model, they're not articulate what that model is, that you could have a good system or a bad system, so that something is failing. Or whereas if you would just be distantiated, you could say, well, this is just this system, this is how it works. No, innovation system really is looking for best practices. For a long time it was Finland, and everyone is then looking at Finland. I was 10 years ago at visiting ministry in Finland, and they said, well, we have a special department because so many people from Korea, Taiwan, South America are now visiting Finland as well, because we have a good innovation systems, and we call them innovation system tourists. And we have a special department to guide those tourists around. Now they're no longer the role model, but the point is, some theories have some clear indications of what is the right thing to do, whereas others are more distantiated and they don't know. The last tension is the idea of perspective versus substance. Maybe it becomes a bit abstract, but think about this. Every theory brings its own way of talking about reality. It has its own language, its own concepts, and it then becomes a way of looking at things. So when you start with variation and selection, then everything is variation and selection. You see it everywhere. And you can explain everything with variation and selection. And everything is explained with variation and selection. Whereas if you would see things as networks, then networks are everywhere. Everything is a network, and it can be explained as a network. Or as resources, then you see resources everywhere. Everything is explained in terms of resources. So it becomes also sort of a solipsistic environment, which is always right. And that's perspective, something that's always right. Substance is a specific claim. It is like this and not otherwise. So in a perspective, it's always like that, and if you have a specific claim, it could be different. So then it would be, so variation and selection typically is a perspective, because you cannot say, well, in this case it's not variation and selection. It's always variation and selection. Theories differ in this way. So innovation systems is a perspective. It's always an innovation system. You cannot go somewhere and say, well, there's no innovation system here. No, there is by definition. Whereas path dependency is typically something that occurs and could have been otherwise. You could also conclude, well, I don't see path dependency here. That's also a useful distinction in the kinds of theories we use. Okay, so it's a lot. I have 8 theories. Now we have 5 tensions. I really would ask you attention for a distinction in 4, because I also would like to have a second reflection on these theories, not in the terms of tensions, but in the kinds of what kind of stories do they generate? What kind of plot is involved here? This is maybe a step too far for you, but still I think it's interesting provocation to see that the theories we produce and the accounts we give of innovations are stories in a sense. And that is from literary studies, famous book of Hayden White, where he says, there's no perspective without a story. And if you look at stories, there's always a plot in a story. Well, there are basic distinctions in plot. The 4 plots are there. And the 4 plots are always about protagonists. So someone is doing something and something happenings, and then you have this sequence of events, and yeah, there will be genres there. And so the plots appear in 4 genres that you will recognize, and the audience knows, now I know what kind of story it is. So first, the romance. You know this plot quite well from Hollywood movies and so on. So the idea that there is progress. In the beginning, it may be difficult, tensions, and there are struggles, but in the end, there's harmony. And well, if you were attentive, boy meets girl, then you could say, well, there's harmony inside from the beginning. I know this will go right. Okay, so that's a plot of the genre of romance. The second genre is tragedy. There is failure. Something, no matter how hard we try, we will fail. That's the human condition. And yeah, when someone is optimistic, yeah, because they're young and experienced. It's a strong strand of storytelling in Western culture. And some movies, especially European movies, have this. The romance is more American movies. But it's there. And sometimes you have accounts of innovation in this way. So no matter how hard we try, we will never really make progress here. The third genre is comedy. That there is all kinds of, people are doing all kinds of things, but they don't know exactly what they are doing. They are with their back towards towards history. So there are all kinds of ambiguities, misunderstandings. They are not in control, but somehow things work out well. Yeah, and then everybody has learned something useful. But it's not that people are in control. It's, yeah, they are just moved around by their surroundings, and this is how they end up in all kinds of situations. And the fourth genre is satire. So there's a lot of criticism. It's harsh, and it's yeah, using humor to make positions ridiculous. So these are 4 genres that you find in studies of literary criticism. And I think that these genres also tell us something, could reflect on what kind of stories we tell with theories of innovation. And I did a preliminary overview here. So the standard linear model, when you would have investment in research, and then we develop it, and then that's romance, because you know from the beginning it will work out fine. Whereas also something like path dependency is tragic. So we really try to make it better, and we have struggles over the keyboard. But in the end, yeah, we are not in control there, and we fail. We do not have the best solution, and you have this path dependency with internal combustion engines. We really try, but it's, yeah, how could we, there's so much that brings us, and that's part of the human condition. We are not in control, and yeah, there will be overwhelming situations that will not give us the optimal solution. Then, especially in the social and historical theories, you would find some comedy where there is misunderstandings and people think they are in control, but they are not. And it's in the end, the combination of all these different efforts that bring something, but no one is really in control there. And the satire is not so much in these theories. You see that in particular books and philosophers. So Brave New World, maybe you know this wonderful novel about how things are not that good in the world, and Jacques Ellul, the philosopher, on how technology is really making a joke of us. Sorry, that is indeed what I had to share with you. So these 8 theories, these 5 tensions and 4 genres. It's also something you can take a pick, and I hope it has provoked you in some ways. And well, I'm keen on hearing your questions and refutations, and please have a discussion. Thank you very much.